We'll talk about emerging and young adults in this session. However, we need to be aware that using chronological markers or legal status to locate persons in emerging, young, middle, or older adulthood is limited by demographic, cultural, and educational trends, and by the history in which such trends are embedded. In other words, our perception about people's chronological age are always shaped by social factors such as culture, tradition, and history. People in emerging and young adulthood age from 18 to 45. This is a life stage that transitions from continued dependence on parents to achieving total self-sufficiency and other adult life milestones such as marriage, childbearing, and career commitment. We'll summarize emerging and young adults' common biological, psychological, social, and spiritual development first. Neurobiological study reveals that brain maturation is not complete until prefrontal cortex is fully integrated and executive functions are well established. It is a task most believed to occur around age 25. The brain becomes integrated to be flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable by the time which these changes are completed. A longitudinal study conducted brain MRI scans on a group of children for 10 years. It confirms the brain maturation patterns we just described in a visualized way, which you can see on the picture on the screen. Emerging and young adults typically report good health and are generally active and fit, although certain aspects of health and wellness seems to peak at age of 30. After the age of 30, biological aging is found to have a significant impact on them, especially their fertility. Emerging and young adulthood includes many possibilities for experiments in identity and involvement with the social groups that support them. Aside from identity development and movement towards self-sufficiency, people in this stage typically grapple with beliefs about how the world works and tackle self-reflection and find their place in the world as adults. Despite many young adults achieving historically high level of education, people face careers of enormous uncertainty and specific jobs with little security. In the era of gig work, side hustles, and student loan debts and shocking rents, the choice often seems illusory. Real circumstances sow a lot of confusion, anxiety, and indecisiveness. Maybe the great resignation and quiet quitting could be understood as a pushback against all the stresses young adults are experiencing in our society today. The nature of social life and the number of social connections that people have typically change in emerging and young adulthood. This shift may result from leaving the student role, involvement in long-term intimate relationships, parental responsibilities, or relocation based on employment or family considerations. In this stage of life, the quality of social activity becomes more important than quantity. Parenthood deeply affects young adults' friendship. When young adults become parents, their friends often become the parents of their children's friends. The planned children's activity requires considerable parental involvement and limits the time available for seeing old friends from youth who are not embedded in the same social world. Parenthood also affects relationships with family. Young adults may seek emotional and instrumental support from their parents and may thus move closer to them. The Pew Research Center found that young adults today are much less likely to identify with a religion or participate in religious practices when compared with older generations. However, most of today's young adults describe themselves as spiritual and participate in spiritual practices. Studies often find emerging young adults have a broader range of views about religious and spiritual understanding of death. It is a time when people critically examine their beliefs. For some, spiritual and religious identifications are solidified during this time. a child, a friend, a sibling, or a parent is less likely in emerging and young adulthood than in middle and older adulthood. Thus, young adults, especially those in their early 30s, who experience the death of a loved one, are experiencing an off-time loss. These unexpected deaths are found to be result in an increased incidence of major depressive episodes, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as a prolonged or complicated grief responses. Although these deaths are viewed as off-time losses across cultures, their impact varies according to the people's race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and other social factors. Because many emerging and young adults remain dependent emotionally, financially, instrumentally on their parents, the death of a parent may remove this critical support. Losing a parent at this time of life may feel like loss of a safety net. Emerging and young adults need to process the death of their parents during a very busy phase of time. Many emerging and young adults reported that the difficulty of managing the funeral or estate arrangements while trying to maintain classwork if they are in school or multiple jobs responsibilities. Another study finds that they cope with parental loss by throwing themselves back into school or work quickly. Fewer young adults are found to rely on the surviving parent or family of origin as their primary support, fitting with their developmental need to become more independent. A sibling's death during emerging and young adulthood is also an off-time loss, and particularly distressing if the sibling's death was by suicide. At this age, the sibling is likely to become a key part of young adults' support network. And some studies found that adults who experience the death of a sibling are more likely to have complicated grief, report higher level of depression, and suffer adverse health consequences and include increased risk of death. Many emerging and young adults feel their grief to be disenfranchised after a friend dies. The friend's family members and siblings are viewed as truly legitimate grievers, where grieving friends are often relegated to second-class status. Experiencing the death of a friend may become more common now for young adults due to two alarming trends: the increase in deaths by suicide and from drug overdose. Combined, deaths by drug overdose and deaths by suicide have contributed to the decline in life expectancy in the United States in recent years. Death rates for the 25 to 34 age group increased the most, and followed by the 35 to 44 age group. The death of a spouse or life partner in emerging and young adult is highly stressful and off-time. Studies have shown that parenting after spouse death involves a challenging adjustment to single parenthood and being a lone authority. Even so, being child-focused provides a sense of purpose and increased business that distract from grief. We'll briefly talk about some non-death losses in emerging and young adulthood. Developmental disabilities such as autism spectrum disorder or chronic illnesses from diabetes mellitus to cancer or chronic kidney disease affect many with particularly challenging effects as people reach emerging and young adulthood. Because they need to receive care and support, often from their parents, at very point in their development where they wish to assert their independence. For social workers, helping them to recognize their sense of loss and not being able to achieve those adult independence milestones is part of the work with these individuals and their families. When independent living is the option, helping the family navigate how to check in ways that are acceptable to both parties may also be necessary. Losing the opportunity to have children biologically due to infertility is upsetting and can be considered as a multiracial loss for those who are involuntarily childless. Infertility can occur at any age, but the risk increased after age 30, especially after age 37. The loss of ability to have a child biologically is accompanied by secondary losses, such as the loss of the dream of parenting biological children. Studies confirm that involuntary childlessness is a form of disenfranchised grief, often resulting in grief that cannot be openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, or socially supported. According to the Urban Institute, the percentage of 25 to 34 years old who lived with their parents rose from 12% in 2000 to 22% in 2017, while the same age group's home ownership rate dropped from 45% in 2000 to 38% in 2017. Today's cohort of emerging and young adults usually achieves economic viability as a marker of adulthood later in their life, because of the transition has become far more difficult. Carrying high student loan debt and low credit scores into young adulthood means fewer opportunities to improve one's economic circumstances. An expected future of success and security is lost, although there is growing awareness of the economic structure that work against emerging and young adults, particularly those without advanced education. This loss nevertheless remains largely disenfranchised. As with many disenfranchised losses, the silent self-blame that accompanies it must be exposed to allow young adults mourn their lost expectations, gain strength from one another, and avoid blaming themselves for circumstances beyond their control. They must also be helped to achieve productive work lives that enable a sense of purpose and satisfying independence. Research finds that more than 1/3 of all types of romantic relationships dissolve within 2 years. For some young people, the dissolution of a romantic relationship contributes to growth, but for many others, it is a significant loss. Further, some of the secondary losses from breaking up are subtle, such as the loss of the self-definition provided by being in a couple. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, emerging and young adults are engaging in illicit substance use at ever greater pace, with marijuana using driving the pace, followed closely by prescription pain reliever misuse. When emerging and young adults develop substance use disorders, they often lose any self-sufficiency they have achieved. Additionally, they are typically exposed to a high degree of social stigma that disqualifies them from societally valued positions that may actually reinforce their problem. Depending on the level of use, they may also impair their health and accrue delays in their developmental tasks, with lifelong negative effects. Emerging and young adults who served in the military in wars suffered significant impairments and consequent disability. Many veterans deal with multiple losses of physical and emotional health and related life changes, often unemployment. Many have had to cope with intense emotional reactions after trauma. When working with this population, we need to include veterans' family as well, since they are dealing with stressors like prolonged separations, frequent moves, and residence in foreign countries on the top of the veterans' impairment and disability. Now let's talk about how to help emerging and young adults who are experiencing grief. As in all grief, supporting emerging young adults grievers requires the ability to form supportive, authentic helping relationships to provide psychosocial education about grief and a venue where grievers may tell their stories. Adults are more able to engage in typical talk therapy, but emerging or young adults can still benefit from activities that assist them to articulate their grief. Empirical study finds using pictures, songs, and other mementos can allow young adult grievers to speak in the ways that they might otherwise avoid. Another study finds that mindfulness training may be particularly useful in assisting bereaved young adults. Specifically, mindfulness training can help young adults to build impulse control and help with regulating emotions. The complicated grief treatment model is found to be effective when working with young adults who experienced sudden and traumatic loss. It helps people to adapt to their loss by identifying the complications and then facilitating the adaptive process. The model includes 16 sessions that focus on 7 core themes: understanding grief, managing painful emotions, thinking about the future, strengthening relationships, telling the story of the death, learning to live with reminders, and remembering the person who died. Our session ends here today. Please contribute to the literature review discussion and respond to the session's case study. I hope you will apply something that we'll talk about in this session to analyze the case scenario. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. See you next time.